Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everybody's doing well out there. I've been quite busy in life with responsibilities and work and travel and all kinds of stuff. So just haven't had the time to record as many as I would like to. But let me shut my windshield wipers off here. But yeah, so I figured why not jump on the old horn here and go for a little rant-ski. Today we're going to quickly talk about 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And I wanted to just highlight a little bit exactly how exclusive this salvation narrative is in the New Testament last days. And when I say New Testament, I always like to follow it up by saying last days, because people sometimes forget that the New Testament is, in fact, the last days. It's an account, or it's relative or related to those last days, right? It's not to be viewed as something that would go on forever. It's not to be viewed as something that's relevant to people forever. It was to be viewed as something relevant to the last days, right? I cannot stress that enough. And once you understand that, once you're able to grasp that concept and that truth, then everything kind of falls in place and you get a better view of what's actually taking place. So as we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 3, we need to remind ourselves who this epistle or this letter was written to, right? It was obviously written to a group of believers living in Corinth, right? A group of chosen ones, if you will, and children of promise, if you will. But it was written to a very exclusive group. Now, I like to always remind people that we can see exactly who the letters of Corinthians were written to in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where Paul starts out the chapter saying that, quote, all of our fathers passed through the Red Sea and were baptized into Moses. So clearly, Paul is saying that the ones that he's writing to were the descendants of Israel, right? I mean, people like to make a big fuss out of that and confuse it and smoke screen it away and, say, oh, well, there were certainly foreigners with the Israelites when they left Egypt. Yes, that might be true, but that is not the intention of Paul, right? Paul is not saying that to I guess, like hint or suggest that he's writing to people outside of the body of Israel or the descendants of Israel. That could be true, right? There could definitely have been Egyptians or foreigners or other slaves or whatever that left Egypt with Moses and with the Israelites. Yes, that could be true. But that's not the intention. That's not the goal. That's not the point. Paul's focus is on the descendants of Israel and their fathers passing through the Red Sea and being baptized into Moses. So this gives us insight as to whom Paul is writing to in these letters to those in Corinth. He's writing very literally to the children of Israel, the descendants of Israel, aka the children of promise. So when we come to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, or any of the chapters in Corinthians, we have to remember that. We have to keep it in its context, keep it in its relevance, right? If you start thinking it's written to you, you're going to lose track of the whole story. It's not going to make any sense. And I believe, and I'm assured of, the fact that this is why we have thousands of denominations, endless confusion, endless debate, endless disagreement within Christianity today, because these letters are being understood as written to people today, when in reality they were written to people back then, ancient people who were bound under the law of Moses and dead in trespasses and sins of that law. So let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and just take a gandarooski here. And I want you to really pay attention to the exclusivity as I highlight a few things. So we're going to read verse 4 forward just to kind of catch it a little bit in context, but the focus is on verse 7 forward. So in verse 4 it says, and we have such trust through Christ toward God, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think of anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God, who also made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now, a couple things to take notice of here. The statement from Paul that says, who also made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant, well, we got to go to other places and find out who the new covenant was for, right? Like Hebrews 9, for example, that says the new covenant was for the house of Israel and the house of Judah. There's no place for the Gentile or the true pagan in the new covenant. It doesn't say that. Romans 11 says that when the fullness of the nations came in, all Israel will be saved, or would be saved. And in this way, and at that moment, the deliverer would come out of Zion and turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with Jacob when I take away their sins. Jacob's the 12 tribes, the two houses. So there's really no statements that say that the new covenant was for pagan Joe Blows. The statements that are clear, that are crystal clear and not full of hidden meaning and nuance in the New Testament writings, all say that the new covenant was for Israel. Okay, so just something to take notice of, as Paul says, he's made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant. He goes on, he says, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, for the letter kills and the Spirit gives life. So there's the contrast, folks. It's the law, the letter. Okay, now, obviously, I don't have to tell you. You've been around. You've heard me say it. You've heard many say it. The only ones who ever had this law, who ever had the letter, were the Israelites. That is exclusively stated, explicitly stated numerous times over and over throughout the Bible. So only Israel had the letter. Okay? And I like when he uses the letter instead of the law, because it really exclusifies the argument, or it really solidifies the argument, I should say, that this is not about the heart law, okay? If it was about the heart law, he wouldn't be saying the letter, because clearly Joe Blow pagans did not have a letter. They didn't have the letter of the law like the Israelites did, the codified, handwritten ordinances of the law of Moses. But clearly that's what Paul is saying here. He's talking about the letter of the law, and he's contrasting that letter of the law to the Spirit. Okay, that's the contrast. It's the law of Moses versus the Spirit of Christ. Okay, and so that really shows you exactly what Paul's intention here is. And it's not some random, mysterious, undefinable heart law that these wannabe Israelites like to say people have on their heart, but they can't define it. They can't tell you what it is. They just say, it's, not to kill people. Okay, great. But there's no codifying that law. There's no understanding, specifically each point of that law, which I think speaks volumes to the fact that this story is not about us. But Paul here is saying that the letter kills. Okay, the letter, literal letter, meaning the handwritten ordinances of the law of Moses, kills. It brings death. Okay, and he's going to continue on that theme here in the next verses. But notice that the killing, the death, by way of the law of Moses is very, very similar to what we see take place in the garden, where Adam sees the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which I believe clearly is the law. It represents the law. The tree of knowledge, right? It gave knowledge of guilt. It illuminated what was right and wrong in the sight of God, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong. And Adam chose to violate that commandment, violate that law, trespass against that law. And what happened? Well, he died. Okay, he died. And that's what Paul is saying here, that the letter kills. It brings the death. It brings the separation. So very, very important to take notice of. But let's look at verse 7 here. We're going to notice some juicy chicken nuggets here. Okay, verse 7. But if the ministry of death... Now remember, he had just said that the letter kills. Okay, now, as I just said, that means the handwritten ordinances, or the handwritten requirements, as Paul put it in other letters like Colossians, the handwritten ordinances of the law of Moses kills. Okay, it brings death. So he goes on in verse 7, he says, but if the ministry of death, written and engraved on stones, was glorious, okay, so clearly his focus is on the law of Moses, okay, nobody can deny that. Okay, he's talking about the ministry of death, written and engraved on tablets. Okay, what was that? Was that the random, mysterious heart law that Joe Blow pagans want you to believe is condemning you today? No, that is the literal, written and engraved on stones law of Moses. Okay, that's what Paul's focus is on. Now, it's interesting to note that people would argue that Paul's focus is on a law given to pagans, right? Or I'm sorry, they want you to believe that these letters, I should say, that are written to the Corinthians are actually written, generally to pagans, right? I mean, that's the argument. That's what I always believe. That's what I was always taught by, wannabe pastors and whatnot, is that specifically these letters of Corinth were very, very heavy on the pagan side, right? Now, there'll be arguments that, oh yeah, there were Jews present, this, that, and the other. But when you're a Christian, when you're a wannabe coming through the ranks, trying to figure out how the hell you fit into this story, the pastors and the teachers that are teaching you will all tell you that Corinth is a very, very pagan church, or it's a very, very Gentile-heavy church, right? That was obviously a foreign place, the land of Corinth. Paul is writing to them, therefore they must be the Gentiles, right? That's just, basic elementary level Christianity 101. But notice that Paul is not talking about pagans. Paul's whole focus here is on the law of Moses. Why is that? Right? If he's writing to pagans, why would he be talking about the law of Moses? Right? Very, very important to take notice of. So he's going on and he's comparing the law of Moses to the Spirit. Well, wouldn't the pagans, so-called pagan Joe Blows in this area of Corinth, wouldn't they read this letter and be like, huh? What? I don't understand this. Like, why was I ever condemned under the ministry of death, the law of Moses? I wasn't part of that. I'm not circumcised, right? But of course, we know that Paul is writing to Israelites living in Corinth, paganized, scattered, lost sheep, whom God was seeking out, the elect whom God was calling back from every nation, tribe, tongue, and kindred. And his focus here is on the law of Moses. So he goes on, verse 7. But if the ministry of death, written and engraved on tablets, was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of the glory of his countenance, which glory was passing away, how will the ministry of the Spirit not be more glorious? So here's Paul again comparing the law of Moses to the law of the Spirit, the law of on stones and tablets to the law of Christ, the law of Spirit. Right? And notice that he refers back to the children of Israel, how they could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face, right? When he had, saw God and, received the tablets, he came down, the tale. And then he says, how will the ministry of the Spirit not be more glorious? So again, the contrast, right? He's not contrasting the Spirit to just any old heart law. Okay, he's contrasting the Spirit to the law of Moses, which only the children of Israel had. I'm trying to draw out the exclusivity of Paul's letters here a little bit for you. Verse 9, for if the ministry of condemnation had glory, that's the law written on stones and tablets. He says, for if the ministry of condemnation had glory, the ministry of righteousness exceeds much more in glory. There's the contrast again. Again, he's not contrasting against a random Joe Blow heart law. He's contrasting the ministry of righteousness up against the ministry of the law of Moses, the ministry of condemnation and death. Verse 10, for even what was made glorious had no glory in this respect, because the glory that excels. For if what is passing away was glorious, what remains is much more glorious. Okay, so again, what was passing away in that day, in the last days? Well, the law of Moses. That's the whole point. The ministry of condemnation and death, what kept the children of Israel, God's chosen people, condemned in bondage for all those years, was passing away and was going to be replaced for them, exclusivity is key, for them with something much better. Verse 12, therefore, since we have such hope, we use great boldness of speech, unlike Moses, who put a veil over his face so that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the end of what was passing away. But their minds were blinded. Okay, now remember, keep it in context. The context is on Israel. The context is on God giving Israel the law through Moses. The context is on the children of Israel not being able to look at the glory of Moses' face. The context is on the law of Moses passing away and being replaced with a new law, right? With a new theme, with a new covenant, the covenant of the Spirit, right? Look at verse 14. It says, but their minds were blinded, speaking of the Israelites. Here he goes. For until this day, the day that Paul is writing in, the same veil remains unlifted in the reading of the Old Testament, because the veil is taken away in Christ. But even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil lies on their hearts. Now, who's there? Who was Paul just speaking about in all the previous verses leading up to this? Was it the Egyptians? Nope. Was it the Italians? No. Was it the Frenchmen? No. Was it the Chinese? No. Okay? It was the Israelites. Okay? I didn't really do a good Chinese impression there. It's not my strong suit, but I tried. But the focus was on the Israelites. So notice that he says, even to this day when Moses is read, a veil lies on their heart. So I'm trying to get you to understand that the focus is still on them, the Israelites. Paul's focus is on the veil that was over the Israelites' hearts even to his day. Verse 16, nevertheless, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. When one of who? When one Egyptian? No. When one Italian? No. When one Chinaman? No. When one Portuguese? No. When one Israelite turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Do you see how the context never sways away from Israel? Okay? I don't know how this ever got so far away from what it's actually saying, but it's very unfortunate. That's why it's my job to put it back in its proper place. Verse 17, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. But we all, we who? We Italians? No. We Egyptians? No. We Czechoslovakians? No. But we Israelites, we all Israelites, all of us, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord. So do you see how it's imperative that you keep it in its proper context? We cannot let it sway. We cannot let it go to something that it never intended to be. We have to keep it in its same context. And the most important thing to take notice of in today's rantaruski, is the exclusivity of what Paul is talking about. The specific, I was trying to say a word, but it didn't come out right. The specific, nature and intention of Paul in this section is such that he wants his readers to know that he is not comparing the Spirit to any Joe Blow random heart law. He is comparing the Spirit to the law of Moses. Okay? That's all that's in focus. And when you understand that the law of Moses was so exclusive in this tale, it was so unique, it was so, peculiar, and given exclusively to a people, and only to a people named Israel, then you can see exactly how Israel only is a powerhouse to be reckoned with. Because Paul's intention here is not to say that everybody was under a heart law and everybody needed the Spirit. No, Paul's intention here was clearly to say that only those under the law of Moses were relative to what was taking place with the Spirit. Okay, that's the contrast. Law of Moses, Spirit. Okay, so folks, that's where I'm going to cap it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like, a Rooski. If not, you know what to do. And we'll catch you on that next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.